Okay, so I'm here to introduce one of my favorite senators, Senator Josh McKoon. We met about 5 years ago, and I've never had anyone sit down with me at that age and have a conversation about my political career. He has been so dedicated to work with religious freedom, lowering taxes, making government smaller, and really dedicating his life to serving the people. And I'm just honored here to have Senator Josh McKoon. He's going to be running for Secretary of State, and he would make a great candidate. Well, he is a great candidate, and he would make a great secretary. So we're happy to have you, and we look forward to hearing you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. In 5 years, that's hard to believe. First of all, let me thank y'all for the invitation to be with you this evening. My name is Josh McKoon, and I am running for Secretary of State. What I'd like to do with the time I have with you this evening is to spend a few minutes telling you about my personal background, just sort of who I am, where I've come from, why I'm running for Secretary of State, what I hope to accomplish in the office, and why I think I'm your best choice in the May 22nd Republican primary. My family moved to Columbus, Georgia because my great-grandfather had a job opportunity to go work at the Eagle and Phoenix Textile Mill in downtown Columbus, right along Chattahoochee River. He worked there for 50 years. My grandfather dropped out of school in the 8th grade during the Great Depression to help take care of our family. Worked a lot of different jobs in those years until World War II broke out. He enlisted in the Army, went to train down the road at Fort Benning, served in the Pacific until the war ended, moved back to Columbus. He married my grandmother, who worked at commercial printers. My dad was the first member of our family to go to college. He went to Auburn University. He worked in that same Eagle and Phoenix Textile Mill in the summertime to pay tuition. He went on to law school, and he's been practicing law for the last 40 years or so. And I followed in my dad's footsteps. I went to Furman University for my undergraduate degree. They tell you to get the bad news out of the way early in these speeches, so I'll go ahead and tell y'all I went to the University of Alabama for law school. That doesn't go over too well with some folks. But I do pick up a vote every now and then. I will tell y'all, on the night of the national championship game, I guess everybody knows because of the president what Twitter is. The likely Democratic nominee in this race is a fellow named John Barrow. He was a congressman for 10 years from the Athens area. And Congressman Barrow got on Twitter and said, I hope all the candidates for Secretary of State are pulling for Georgia tonight, even Josh McKoon, even though he went to the University of Alabama. And so I responded to him. I've been pulling for Georgia since I was a kid, and much to my dad's chagrin. But I wrote him back on Twitter and I said, I've been pulling for Georgia my whole life, and I didn't even have to ask Nancy Pelosi permission. And so I haven't heard from Congressman Barrow since then. So, but I tell you all that to give you a little bit of a sense of who I am, where I come from. My family, we've really been able to live our American dream, and this state and this country has given us that opportunity. And what got me interested in politics and public service is a sense that for the average person, it is getting harder to achieve their American dream. We talk a lot about Georgia being the #1 state to do business, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But what we really mean when we say that is that Georgia is the #1 state for Fortune 500 companies to locate in Atlanta. And in the last 15 years, we've seen our share of low-income families increase and our share of middle-income families decrease. And so I think that we got to do something about that. And that's what's really animated my involvement in politics, being a county Republican Party chairman, being a state senator, and now running for Secretary of State. So why Secretary of State? I had a lot of change in my life in 2015 and 2016. My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in July of 2015. She passed away 11 weeks to the day of her diagnosis. That gets you to thinking about, the time that you have here is limited and trying to make the most of the time that you've got. I got married in August of 2016. One of the best decisions I've ever made in my life was marrying Jacqueline Bird. And just with all those different changes, I'd kind of decided I was going to step away from the Senate, maybe take a break from elective politics altogether. And then Brian Kemp decided to run for governor. I had a lot of people call me up and say, you really ought to think about this. And so my wife and I sat down, we spent a lot of time praying about it, and we decided over the summer last year to get in the Secretary of State's race. And so why am I running for Secretary of State? I'm running to make Georgia the fastest state in the nation to get a job and the toughest state in the nation to cast an illegal vote. That's really what our platform boils down to. And I'm just going to spend a moment telling you what I mean by those two things. When I talk about making Georgia the fastest state in the nation to get a job, people say, well, Secretary of State, doesn't that just deal with elections? What does that have to do with jobs? Well, what it has to do with jobs is the Secretary of State oversees all of our licensing boards. There are 41 licensing boards that issue over 100 licenses in our state. And this may come as a surprise to some of you, but 40 years ago, fewer than 1 in 20 Americans had to get a license to go to work. And when you think about it, all a license is a permission slip from the government to go work. But today, and it is a tax too, but today, more than 1 in 4 Americans have to have a license to go to work. And I think that the pendulum has swung too far in that direction. There's some professions that need to be licensed. Engineers, we don't want buildings falling down. Nurses, we want people protected when they're receiving health care. But I think most people in this room would agree with me that if we stopped requiring licenses for librarians tomorrow, which we currently do, you have to have a state license, that would not create a public health or public safety crisis, right? So we need to ask this question of all the licensing boards, all the licensed professions. Is this something that should require a permission slip from the government that you have to pay for to go to work? And if it is, because sometimes the answer to that question is going to be yes, can we make it easier? Is there something we can do to smooth the pathway to connect people to the dignity of honest, hard work? And I'd just tell you a couple of quick facts about our licensing. In this state, a cosmetology license holder. Cosmetology license is a license to cut and color hair and do nails. On average, that person spends 350 days in training before they get their license, before they can get their first paycheck. Now, by comparison, the average EMT license holder, this is somebody who's been trained to give life-saving aid in the event of a medical emergency, on average, spends 31 days in training. Now, there is something profoundly wrong with the system where the license to cut and color hair and do nails takes 10 times the training as the license to render life-saving aid in the event of a medical emergency. So we can do better. We can cut some red tape. We can make it easier for folks. I spoke to a young lady not long after I started running for this office who said, Josh, I want to cut and color hair, but I'm not really interested in nail care. But if I'm going to get this license, I've got to take the whole exam. I've got to study for this entire thing. I've got to pass the practical for all of it. Well, why couldn't we just make it modular so she could take the test for the skill she wants to go do? We ought to be about the business of rolling the government out of the way and connecting people to the dignity of honest hard work. We spend all this time chasing economic development projects and saying we're going to write a big check from the taxpayers, or we're going to change the law to, favor this company or that company. We can create an awful lot of jobs if we'll just get out of people's way and let them go to work. So I think that's the number one job of your Secretary of State. One last word about licensing. We got to have more resources to do the job that needs to be done in those professions that need to be regulated. And I'll give you a quick example. We have over 170,000 licensed nurses in our state, okay? Out of those 170,000, there are 550 complaints pending right now where somebody has said this nurse has hurt someone or done something to violate the nursing licensure laws. It is taking 400 days to investigate each and every one of those complaints. Now, I want y'all to think about that. A year and a half, somebody either has a cloud over their professional life if they've been wrongfully accused of something, Or if they're hurting patients, they could get hired by another employer because their license is still valid and hurt somebody else. But why is that? It's because we have 18 inspectors to handle 41 boards that are issuing over 100 licenses. Now, you may say, well, where's the money going? All these people are paying licensing fees. The Secretary of State, between corporate filings and professional licensing fees, generates over $80 million a year. But all of that money flows into the state's general fund. None of those licensing fees are dedicated to the regulation of those professions. That's why I filed a constitutional amendment this year to give y'all the opportunity to tell the legislature, hey, keep your hands off that money, make sure it goes for the purpose that the people are paying for. That's a service that they're expecting to receive from the government. So that's something we've got to do. We can't expect a state employee to walk into a funeral home on a Monday and regulate them, a nurse's office on a Tuesday and regulate them, a barber shop on Wednesday and regulate them, an architect's office on Thursday and regulate them. They can't be an expert in all those different things. We've got to have enough inspectors to cover the waterfront. So that's a little bit on licensing. What about the elections piece? There are a couple different things to tell you there. Everybody in here, I assume, is a voter, and you're familiar with the electronic voting machines we've had for the last 15 years or so. They are coming to the end of their usable life cycle. Okay, we're going to have to change the technology we use. And we passed a bill yesterday in the Senate during that very late night session to start migrating away from the electronic voting machines into a paper-based system that can be audited.
Yes.
And that's something I've been working on for several years with Senator Bruce Thompson. It's moved over to the House. We're going to try to get that passed before the end of the year. My commitment to you as Secretary of State, because we're talking about the expenditure of millions of taxpayer dollars, this process needs to be open. It needs to be transparent. We need to let the best product win. We need to let the best bid win to get the most value for your tax dollars. And we need a system that we can independently verify the outcome. Because an electronic voting machine, you can't do that. City of Atlanta, they had a mayor's race in the fall. 100,000 people voted, 700 vote margin. Mary Norwood wants a recount. You can't do a recount when you don't have physical ballots. It's not possible. So we got to have a system where we can have a recount, where people have greater confidence in the process. And so I'm committed to that. I frankly think you need someone in this job who is a lawyer, who has experience practicing election law. Being the Secretary of State used to be kind of a sleepy job, really. And then the 2000 presidential election came along, and a lady named Katherine Harris in Florida got sued over these butterfly ballots. I don't know how many people in this room remember that or remember seeing Katherine Harris on television. But Secretary of State's office gets sued all the time now. And why is that? In a state like Georgia, y'all think the election law is ever going to change at the General Assembly? Not unless the Republican Party says so. So the Democrats haven't given up, but they just are trying to change Georgia election law. Instead of at the State House, they're trying to do it at the courthouse. So they file these lawsuits, they try to get in front of the right kind of judge and get a decision to make it easier to cheat. Because frankly, that's what we're dealing with, right? I mean, we stand for free and fair and honest elections. And the folks on the far left, they want to make it easier to cheat. That's just that's the way it is. There was a lawsuit last summer. Maybe y'all are far enough away from Metro Atlanta, y'all didn't get bombarded with all the TV ads in the Karen handled John Ossoff election. No. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. They filed multiple lawsuits, including one on voter registration. They said, you know, this 30-day blackout period y'all have where people can't register before an election, that's wrong. And they got in front of the right judge, and he extended voter registration by 60 days. So we had people literally registering after the first round, before the runoff, right in the middle of the election. And I can tell you, talk to some elections officials. They'll explain to you why we need that 30-day period. It's so we know who these people are and that they're eligible to vote. You know, this is all about trying to get away from that 30-day blackout period makes it easier to cheat. Yeah. And so what did we do when we lost that lawsuit? We just gave up. They registered 10,000 more people during that time frame. And Karen Handel won by about 9,000 votes. Thankfully, a lot of those 10,000 didn't turn out and vote in the runoff. You've got to know, you got to have a Secretary of State who can say, you know what, I know the law on this subject. We need to go to the 11th Circuit because that judge got it wrong. Or we need to go to the U.S. Supreme Court because that judge got it wrong. And we're going to defend the position that your elected officials like Senator Steve Gooch take. Just one other quick example on litigation. Counties and cities around the state have been sued to print ballots in multiple foreign languages. Now, I just want you to think about that for a minute. If someone comes to this country legally and they want to become a citizen, they have to take a test, a citizenship test. And part of the citizenship test is you've got to demonstrate that you understand the English language. So it should not be controversial. And we should have a Secretary of State who's willing to say, the price you pay to participate in our political process is understanding English well enough to vote. You know, that should not be a controversial position. But you got to have somebody that's willing to stand up. You got to have somebody that's able to understand the legal threats that are out there and respond to them quickly. What about voter fraud? Okay, the people on the far left say there's no voter fraud. Would anyone like to guess how many sworn law enforcement officers work in the Secretary of State's office to handle complaints of election fraud? Anybody want to give me a guess?
25.
25. Anybody else?
50.
50.
0.
1, 0. 2. There are 2. Now I just want you to think about this. You know, if we only had 2 state troopers to cover the entire state, none of us would say nobody's speeding. There just wouldn't be very many speeding tickets written. And that's what's going on with election fraud. You know, there's no investigation that occurs because we don't have the resources to do that. I had a situation in Columbus a couple of years ago. A lady shows up at the elections office. She's got an envelope with 19 absentee ballots she wants to turn in. And it just so happened a member of our Board of Elections was there and said, hey, what are you doing with 19 absentee ballots? Because the clerk was getting ready to take them and count them. But they separated them out. Turns out the lady worked at a local nursing home. She said, well, I'm just doing this as a service to the residents. So they investigate and they say, where did these 19 ballots come from? 19 residents of this nursing home, 15 of whom could not sign their name or make their mark. But someone had filled out an absentee ballot application form. Someone had voted the ballot. And this is going to come as a big surprise to you. They did not vote for Republicans. Those ballots were not being cast for Republican candidates. I know it's shocking. I know it's shocking. But no one was prosecuted. There was no investigation beyond what the local Board of Elections did because there aren't the resources to investigate. So you got to have a Secretary of State who's going to go to the legislature and say, hey, we need the resources to prosecute these cases. So I'm going to wind up by telling you why I think I'm your best choice in the May 22nd Republican primary. You need somebody who can put together the coalition necessary not just to win in the primary, but to win in the general election. I believe this is going to be the most hotly contested race in the general election in November. You've got a former United States congressman on the other side, someone who won in districts designed to elect Republicans. He's going to have the backing of the George Soros Secretary of State project. Millions of dollars are going to flow into our state from New York and Los Angeles. So you need to send your A-team out on the field to debate John Barrow. You need somebody who can communicate our issues, who can prosecute the case against John Barrow, who can remind folks that he voted for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House when he was in Congress, that he voted with Barack Obama when Barack Obama was president 85% of the time. You got to have somebody who can do that and do it well. I've got support from 21 of the Republican state senators, including Senator Steve Gooch. All over the state, we've got some strong support. We've been putting together the financial support we need to win. We just had the disclosure January 31st. We're number 1 in funds raised. We're number 1 in funds in the bank because we've been good stewards of what's been given to us. So that's one reason that I think I'm your best choice in the May 22nd Republican primary. The next reason is you need somebody who can walk into this office and do the job on day one. You know, there have been issues in the office. There have been issues of disclosure personal confidential information. There are a lot of management challenges in this office. There are offices in Atlanta, Macon, Tifton. There are assets everywhere, licensing, corporations, elections. I've dealt with all aspects of the office, either as a lawyer in private practice or as a state legislator. I'm ready to do this job the day I walk into the office. The other thing you need, frankly, is anybody can come here and talk to y'all and say, I'm a conservative, I'm going to do conservative things, I'm going to be about voter integrity and so on. But who's actually going to do those things if you entrust them with your support? If you look at the 8 years that I've spent in the state legislature, Savannah talked about my work on religious freedom. That was not popular down at the Capitol. It was not popular with some people in my own party. It would have been much easier for me politically to say, you know what, this is too hard, y'all. We're just going to have to deal with this later on. I'm going to go work on something that's easier to get done. I didn't do that. You know, I've stuck it out. We're fighting on it right now. When I first got elected to the legislature, I said, you know what? We shouldn't be one of 3 states where lobbyists can give anything to the members of the General Assembly while we're in session. That's wrong. There ought to be some kind of reasonable limit on that. That was not popular at the legislature, okay? They were spending $2 million a year on the members of the legislature, gifts to the members of the legislature. And it took us 3 years, but we passed the first ever limitation on lobbyist gifts. The person you entrust with this office is going to be Secretary of State in November of 2020 when Donald Trump is on the ballot for re-election. Yes. Think about how much money they spent on the Karen Handel-John Ossoff race and the lawsuits that were filed. That is a shadow of what is going to be coming to our state when Donald Trump's on the ballot for re-election. They're trying to move our electoral votes into the Elizabeth Warren column, the Cory Booker column, whoever they put up. You've got to have somebody who's going to stand firm and strong for our principles. And we've got good choices in this race. There are other good Republicans running, but I submit to you, I'm the only one who has been tested in the way that the next Secretary of State is going to be tested. And you're not going to have to wonder, is Josh going to do the right thing? Is he going to stand up to the left in the media when the pressure comes? Because I've been there and I've done that. So for all of those reasons, I think I'm your best choice in the May 22nd Republican primary. What you can do to help, if you're interested, I need your vote. May 22nd is the Republican primary. Early voting starts April 30th. Most people don't know what the Secretary of State does. I have a guy who's been very supportive of this campaign. He was introducing me to somebody. He said, we're going to elect Josh Secretary of State and he's going to travel around the world and negotiate trade deals. And I said, no, that's Rex Tillerson. That job's taken, you know. But you know, it's so important. Everybody in this room is an influencer. You care enough to be here tonight. You want to understand the candidates and the issues. You're going to communicate with your friends and family, the folks you go to church with, the folks you work with. Your personal endorsement next to your vote, that is the thing that I really need the most. We're going to have a couple of activities coming up soon that we'd love your participation in. Next week's qualifying. I'm going to qualify to run on Thursday, March the 8th at noon at the state capitol. We're trying to have a real show of force down there so people can see the grassroots support that we're generating from all corners of the state. We'd love to have you come down and join us for that. You can find out more about my campaign at joshmckoon.org. If you're interested in signing up with us, of course, I'll be here after the meeting. There's also Matt Fuentes and Bo Swanson who are with our campaign who'd love to talk to you as well. It's dangerous to give a lawyer a captive audience and a microphone. I'm going to wind up now. If there's time for some questions, I'll be glad to answer some. If not, I'll sit down.
Does
yes?
the Secretary of State involved with reapportionment?
So the question, Secretary of State involves with reapportionment or redistricting. That's really the legislature that does that. I think John Barrow's talking a lot about redistricting in his campaign, but the actual influence of the Secretary of State is relatively little. There's a bill that gets introduced with the map, and that goes through the legislature, and the governor signs it or vetoes it. So Secretary of State really isn't that involved with reapportionment and redistricting.
Do you know if they're starting on it already?
They aren't starting on the what will happen is we'll have the census in 2020. you'll start seeing maps drawn in 2021 for Congress and the state legislature. Yes, ma'am, did you have a question?
I do, and after this about 3 decades, and I don't know if it's in your department or not, but our veterinary clinics are regulated far more than our abortion facilities. I mean, nobody goes and inspects them, they don't even ask about it, they don't get them signed up with a lot of death and mayhem and dirt and filth goes on. What can we do in Georgia to get them at least as much as, the veterinarian clinic is way cleaner than, and save some of these women?
Yes, ma'am, you're absolutely right. I've had a bill that's been pending for the last year or so, and it doesn't look like we're going to get it out this year, that would require abortion clinics to meet the same standard as ambulatory surgery centers in our state. That's been passed in Texas, it's been passed in other states. We need to continue to beat the drum for that. The abortion facility that's in my area in Columbus, there have been complaints about some of the women who've gone in and thankfully chosen to go in a different direction. But they've reported back there's black mold in the building, there are other sanitary issues that need to be addressed. And we get the runaround. We called city government, we were told, oh, you need to call Department of Community Health. They said, oh, it's a private doctor's office, we don't regulate it. We've got to do something about it. And the best solution is for the legislature to mandate that those facilities be treated like any other ambulatory surgery center, because when you're having those procedures going on, the patient that walks into that facility is at risk. That person is at risk. It's not just the child that is going to be murdered. It is the fact that that woman is at risk because there's absolutely no oversight. And so I can't tell you there's anything I can do as your Secretary of State, but I will tell you I've been spending the last 8 years doing everything I can to assist the pro-life cause in our state. Yes, ma'am.
Which one of these governors running is going to best assist you in office with your goals and your plans?
So what I tell everybody, I don't really know Clay Tippins. Obviously, I have served with Senator Hunter Hill. I've served with Senator Michael Williams. I've served with Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, and I've worked with Secretary Kemp, being on the Regulated Industries Committee in the Senate. I feel like any one of those four, I've talked to them about the platform I'm interested in pursuing out of the Secretary of State's office, upgrading the voting machines, taking some steps to improve voter integrity. I believe they will all support that agenda. And so that's kind of where I am. And I'm not saying anything negative about Mr. Tippins. I just don't know him, and I haven't had the opportunity to have a conversation with him.
Because their life, they were over 10 years is a life on them. But a lot of other states have voted them as being illegal.
Right. Virginia's decertified. Yeah, Virginia's decertified their machines. We're one of only 5 states in the nation that still has fully electronic voting. And the trend is clearly moving away from that. My commitment to y'all is if I'm elected, we're going to work with the legislature, get the money appropriated. By the 2020 presidential election, we will have migrated to the paper-based auditable system that I discussed earlier.
We need the money now. I mean, our voters are one of our 10 Bill of Rights. I mean, we need that now. That's more important than anything else.
Yes, ma'am. I agree with you.
None of it matters if we can't do that.
Right. Any other questions?
Ballots with no tags.
Yes, sir, that's right. It's verifiable by the voter. Yes, ma'am.
Will we still be able to see election results as quickly as we do now with the electronic?
Actually, I suspect that election results will be reported even faster. To give you all, and of course, depending on what part of the state you're in, you have a different expectation. The night of the mayor's race in Atlanta was also the night of the U.S. Senate special election in Alabama. 1.3 million votes in Alabama, 92,000 votes in Atlanta. They had their 1.3 million counted before the 92,000 were counted. So it will be noticeably faster to get the result in a statewide election. You may not notice a big difference here. All right, thank you all. Oh, yes, sir.
Does somebody get prosecuted if they're caught doing that?
Because I've never seen anybody get prosecuted for voter fraud.
You know, I'm unaware that there have been a handful. There was one in Eastman, Georgia, over in Dodge County, where somebody was prosecuted
Will you make
successfully.
sure that happens?
Yes, sir. I'm going to go to the legislature. I'm going to ask for additional personnel because we need additional law enforcement within the Secretary of State's office so that these cases can be made and then referred to prosecuting agencies.
Thank you, sir.
You said we have 2 officers in there. How many complaints actually come in about voter fraud?
Good question.
So on a typical election day, you're talking about in the hundreds around the state. You know, and those are, you know, we could talk about written reports versus people calling a hotline and saying, I've seen something in my precinct. But that's one of the issues. If you only got 2 people, let's just say there are 3 complaints on election day, and one is in Dahlonega, and one is in Thomasville, and one is in Brunswick. They're not getting investigated in a timely manner right now with just 2 investigators. So we've got to do better than that. But thank y'all so much. I appreciate your time.